This story, covering centuries, is about wars that created new countries, acquiring vast fortunes, gaining power and prestige, and losing it, industrial espionage, good and bad decisions, and a sequence of events that caused a major financial crisis and resulted in the first bank in the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. Our story starts with the Beelden Storm, directly translated as the storming of images, in the summer of 1566 in the northern part of what was known as the Low Countries. The Low Countries were, at the time, subject to the rule of Spain, a Roman Catholic country with a conservative King Philip II very much against the rise of the Protestants. The Dutch people in the northern parts of the Low Countries were a lot more tolerant, and a conflict between them and the strict attempts of Philip II to convert them back to Catholicism was inevitable. And this is exactly what happened when the Dutch people stormed mainly the Catholic churches in their region and destroyed the art and images in these churches. Hence, the Beelden Storm, or the storming of the images. This led to what became known as the 80 Years' War that lasted from 1568 to 1648. The war eventually ended with the Treaty of Munster, when the Spanish finally had enough, and after England entered the war on the side of the Dutch. The Low Countries also divided into two main parts. The 7 united provinces in the north became the Protestant Netherlands, and the 10 provinces in the south became Catholic Belgium. So we end up with a new country, the Netherlands, with a very strategic position and great ambitions. Amsterdam was already an important center for international trade during the late 1500s. The main attraction in the east, Ceylon, India, China, and the islands in the region, was spices, nutmeg, pepper, and cinnamon. The Portuguese, however, controlled that route. The Dutch merchants therefore had to import their spices from Portugal. At the same time, the Dutch were still fighting against Spain for independence. So when Portugal and Spain formed an alliance, the situation became unbearable for the Dutch. They couldn't trade with their enemy's friend. In 1592, the Dutch obtained detailed maps and charts that showed the route to the east, making it possible for the Amsterdam merchants to send their own ships directly to the east and cutting the Portuguese middlemen out. But they did some industrial espionage first. They sent Cornelis de Houtman, posing as a merchant, to Lisbon to verify the authenticity of the charts and to get whatever additional information that he could. While Cornelis de Houtman was doing his part in Lisbon, the Amsterdam merchants raised 290,000 guilders to build and equip 4 ships. The Dutch fleet sailed on the 2nd of April 1595 and reached Java, an island in the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, in June 1596, after some delays at sea. Although the expedition suffered setbacks, they returned to the Netherlands with enough pepper, nutmeg, and mace to show a profit of 400%. Several Dutch merchants then travelled to the east as well after that. However, Dutch merchants operating on their own was not ideal. Remember, the Dutch were still at war with Spain during this time. So the Dutch made a very strategic decision. On 20 March 1602, they created the United East India Company, known as the VOC, to get the different Dutch merchants to work together, to reduce competition amongst themselves, and to raise more money for future expeditions. It is also important to note that the VOC was government-backed and had the sole mandate to trade in the East, effectively giving the VOC the monopoly to trade there. The VOC was the world's first formally listed public company. It issued bonds and shares to the general public. The bonds and shares also traded on an official stock exchange in Amsterdam. Up till then, it was customary to establish a company for each individual expedition and to give the sailors a share or interest in the project as an additional incentive over and above their wages. The VOC was, however, established as a long-term institution that issued shares and bonds to the general public. This enabled the VOC to raise almost 6.5 million guilders, making it possible to acquire ships and crew, build forts, maintain armies, and conclude treaties with countries and rulers in the East, all in the interest of trade and profit. It is estimated that the VOC was worth $7.9 trillion if converted into today's values. The Dutch East Indies, now known as Indonesia, was obviously a Dutch colony at the time. The VOC management felt that it was important to be close to their market, and the VOC established its head office in Batavia, now known as Jakarta. Between Amsterdam on the one side and Batavia on the other side is a long stretch of sea. The VOC needed a safe harbor for their ships sailing between Amsterdam and the east. The southern point of Africa was ideal for this purpose. So, the VOC sent Jan van Riebeeck in 1652 to establish a resupply outpost at the Cape of Storms, later renamed the Cape of Good Hope, to service VOC ships sailing to and from the east. The VOC only intended the Cape to be an outpost and a halfway station. It was not the VOC's intention to establish a Dutch colony at the foot of Africa. The Cape outpost or halfway station merely had to provide a safe harbor for the VOC ships and food for their crew. In 1657, the VOC released some of its employees stationed at the Cape in order to create an agricultural community, a group of free burghers or farmers, to increase farming operations and the supply of fresh produce. This was done in an attempt to reduce costs. Instead of having full-time employees to produce these goods, the VOC could now buy the required produce from free and independent farmers. Whereas these people were previously VOC employees, they now became part of the local community. This was probably the first company restructuring or retrenchment exercise in South Africa. Fast forward 100 years. Paintings from the 1770s show the Cape as organized and settled, no longer an outpost, but a town. The streets were straight and houses were built in regular blocks. Some houses were thatched and others had flat roofs. Gardens were maintained behind walls and hedges, and livestock were kept in enclosures. The Cape was a settled and structured community with its own economy. During the early years, the Cape Colony did not have its own currency. Passing ships and some immigrants from all over the world spent their own money at the Cape, resulting in a number of different currencies in circulation, but mainly Dutch guilders and Rijksdaalders, Spanish doubloons and English pounds. All these currencies were accepted for its silver and gold content. The currencies in use had intrinsic value. There was also an active lending market in the Cape of Good Hope. Individuals lent to each other, the government of the day provided loans, and large domestic merchant houses also extended credit. This resulted in an extensive informal credit market. The van Reenen family was probably the richest family in the Cape in 1780. The father, Jacob van Reenen, had made his fortune from land, meat and alcohol. The one son, Dirk, owned a very successful wine business, and the other two sons, Jacobus and Sebastian, went into the meat trade and eventually established a large meat merchant house. The Cape had wine and wheat, but not meat. This created the opportunity for the brothers, Jacobus and Sebastian, to buy sheep from the farmers to the north in the interior of the country. Due to the fact that currency was already in short supply, the Cape adopted merchants' letters of credit or promissory notes as a means of payment, especially in the outlying areas. This is how it worked. The Van Reenen brothers would buy sheep from the farmers and issue what became known as skaapbrieven, directly translated as sheep letters, or slagtersbrieven, again translated as butcher letters. These skaap or slagtersbrieven, basically promissory notes, would be issued as payment for the sheep. The farmers were far away from town and did not need immediate payment in actual hard currency. The agreement was that the farmers could exchange these promissory notes for hard currency when they visited the Cape. The promissory notes eventually became a form of money in itself when the farmers started to use them to pay for their own purchases. With skaap or slagtersbrieven convertible into hard currency at the offices of the Van Reenen brothers in the Cape, these promissory notes effectively became money, giving the Van Reenen brothers the right to print money. Certain developments would, however, cause a perfect storm and lead to a major financial crisis in the Cape of Good Hope. The American War of Independence between England and the 13 colonies in America from 1775 to 1783 had a great impact on international trade and substantially reduced the number of ships that passed the Cape. This had a direct impact on the Cape economy. The Netherlands supported the American cause, resulting in England declaring war on the Netherlands on 20 December 1780. The French also supported the Americans, causing further tension between England and France. Anticipating an invasion by England, the Cape asked the French for help. A French fleet arrived in the Cape on 3 July 1781. The French soldiers, however, insisted on being paid in gold and silver coin, putting further strain on the already limited supply of currency in the Cape. Moving sheep from the interior to the Cape also became more and more dangerous, with regular raids causing severe losses. Increasing security measures increased costs, with a direct impact on the Van Reenen brothers' business. The Van Reenens also expanded into imports. They sold meat to the passing ships and used the currency earned to finance imports. Wars going on in the rest of the world adversely affected international trade and led to a decline in shipping traffic around the Cape. A lack of hard currency caused the Cape government to change the approach with regard to the Ryksdale, the official currency in the Cape at that time. Up till then, the Ryksdale was backed by gold and silver. In 1782, it was ruled that the Ryksdale was no longer convertible into gold and silver, making the Ryksdale a pure fiat money. With the increased demand for money, the Cape government started to print additional Ryksdales in 1778. This led to inflation and a decline in the purchasing power of the Ryksdale. By 1793, the Van Reenen brothers operated a substantial business, but with major financial difficulties. In response to what was happening around them, the Van Reenen brothers decided to change the rules of their skaap or slagtersbrieven, the promissory notes that they were issuing. Up till then, the agreement had been that these promissory notes would be exchanged for gold and silver coins upon demand. In December 1792, the Van Reenen brothers, however, announced that their promissory notes would in future only be redeemable for goods, and also only at certain merchants, mostly friends of them. It is no surprise that the farmers stopped selling their animals for these promissory notes. In May 1794, the two brothers divided the business between them and parted ways. The business eventually failed. In the light of the resulting financial crisis experienced in the Cape, the VOC sent two commissioners to investigate the matter. The first thing that they did was to restore fiscal discipline. By merely printing more money to cover the government deficit caused by overspending, the Cape government had fueled inflation and the depreciation of the currency. The commissioners also concluded that the fact that the Cape Colony did not have a domestic bank was also a major weakness and a main reason that caused the financial crisis. As a result, the Bank of Lening, the first bank in the Cape and in South Africa for that matter, was created on 15 March 1793. The South African banking industry today boasts balance sheet assets in excess of 5 trillion rand. South African banks play a significant role not just in the domestic economy of the country, but also the region, and links the country to the international economy. This story started with a religious conflict between the Dutch and Spain, which eventually led to the formation of the Netherlands. Dutch ambition and strategy created the VOC, the world's first publicly traded listed company. International trade around the southern tip of Africa resulted in the establishment of an outpost at the Cape of Good Hope. This outpost eventually turned into a settlement that grew into a town and then became a city. All of this opened up opportunities for prosperity to create and accumulate great wealth. Certain foreseen and unforeseen events, as well as some bad decisions, eventually resulted in a great financial crisis where fortunes were lost and some lessons were learned. In the light of numerous financial crises over the years, it is often said that history repeats itself. At the same time, we also know that humans are resilient, that we can learn from the past, and that we have the ability to create a better future. The problems that we face in the world and in our own country are not unique. Dieter Uchtdorf said it best. It is your reaction to adversity, not adversity itself, that determines how your life story will develop. Our country, South Africa, was formed and molded during times of war and conflict, periods of great distress and crises, but also amidst opportunities and possibilities. It all starts somewhere with an idea, a dream, a goal, and some positive action to make it a reality.